When a judge questions Carrie Underwood's right to represent herself in a heated courtroom battle, she answers with unwavering resolve and leaves everyone speechless. Carrie Underwood never imagined she would swap a Nashville concert stage for the hushed intensity of a courtroom, but when her property rights came under threat from a ruthless developer, she refused to stand down. Carrie rose from her chair, facing the packed courtroom of Davidson County. The tension was visible on the faces gathered around her, reporters craning their necks, fans who had slipped inside, and curious onlookers who wanted to see if this famous singer could hold her own in a court of law. At the bench sat Judge Wallace Bridger, a stout man in his 60s, with a reputation for toughness. He peered at Carrie over his spectacles, his expression revealing a skeptical amusement. "Miss Underwood," he began, rapping his gavel once, "I understand you've chosen to represent yourself today. I must remind you, Tennessee property laws aren't as simple as writing a song. Are you certain this is the path you want to take?" Carrie's gaze was steady. "Yes, Your Honor. I've spent time studying the statutes and precedents relevant to my case. I'm prepared to defend my rights." A low ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd. Some had come anticipating a spectacle. Others sincerely believed Carrie was in over her head. Leaning forward in his seat was Gerald Madsen, the man who had caused all this trouble. A veteran of real estate development, he wore a sharp suit and an even sharper smirk. Next to him stood his attorney, Gerald Parker, known throughout Nashville's legal circles as ruthless and sharp-tongued. Judge Bridger observed Carrie with mild curiosity. "Very well, Miss Underwood. You may proceed with your opening statement." Carrie stepped around the plaintiff's table. She was dressed modestly, no stage glamour, no glittering dresses, just a crisp blouse and neatly pressed slacks. She inhaled carefully before speaking. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen, I come before this court because Mr. Madsen has built a significant portion of his condo development on land I own. I purchased it in 2015, and everything was clearly delineated. But last year, my boundary lines were ignored. Construction crews moved in, kept going despite repeated warnings and attempts to negotiate. Now, I'm left with no choice but to seek legal remedy." Gerald Parker rose, flashing an incredulous smile. "That's a stirring story, Miss Underwood. I wonder, though, if you might be mixing up your star tours with your property lines. We're here to deal in facts, not chart-topping hits." A few people in the gallery chuckled, but Carrie remained calm. "I promise you, Mr. Parker," she replied, "I can read a boundary survey as well as I can read music." Parker gave her a theatrical bow. "Of course you can." Judge Bridger's gavel came down with a sharp crack. "Enough sniping. Let's proceed in an orderly fashion. Miss Underwood, please present your evidence." Carrie walked to a large easel where she'd mounted an enlarged survey map. She lifted a pointer, tapping a specific area. "This is the property line as recorded with the county. This set of documents," she lifted a small sheaf of legal records, "shows the registered boundaries. When Mr. Madsen began his luxury condo development last summer, I notified him in writing of potential encroachment. Those notices went unanswered. A second round of notices, same result. Now, we find ourselves here." Parker rolled his eyes dramatically. "The defense will contend that Miss Underwood's claims, while heartfelt, are based on outdated surveys that no longer reflect the reality of the terrain. We have experts who'll testify that the land in question shifted over time." Murmurs rippled through the rows. Carrie pressed her lips together, staying focused. "Shifted over time?" she repeated softly, letting the question hang. "That sounds more like a convenient excuse than a geological phenomenon." Before Parker could retort, Judge Bridger intervened. "Mr. Parker, you'll have ample time to question Miss Underwood's position later. Miss Underwood, please call your first witness." Carrie nodded and turned to a wiry older man in a neat flannel shirt. "I'd like to call Jacob Reynolds to the stand." Jacob stepped forward, was sworn in, and took his seat. "Mr. Reynolds, can you tell the court your profession and how long you've been practicing it?" "I'm a land surveyor, ma'am," he answered, voice shaking only slightly in such a large crowd. "I've been doing this job in Davidson County for nearly 40 years. Have you had the opportunity to survey my property recently, Mr. Reynolds?" He nodded. "Yes, I have." "And what did you discover?" Jacob cleared his throat. "According to every official record I could find, your property line runs exactly where you indicated on that map. The condo structure built by Madsen Development encroaches more than 30 feet past your boundary." Carrie thanked him and turned toward Parker. "Your witness." Parker strode up, exuding polished confidence. "Mr. Reynolds, you say you've worked in Davidson County for 40 years. That's quite a career. Would you agree that boundaries can shift due to erosion, repositioning, or any number of natural factors?" Reynolds shrugged. Small shifts, sure, but not a sudden 30-foot shift. That's no simple erosion. That's ignoring boundaries. Parker's grin tightened. So you're certain there's no mistake in Miss Underwood's claim? Positive, the surveyor replied firmly. A flicker of annoyance crossed Parker's face. No further questions. Carrie let Jacob step down. The tension in the room increased. She'd taken the first step, but she sensed the judge was still skeptical. She caught glimpses of fans in the gallery, some offering her encouraging nods, others seemingly uncertain if this star was about to embarrass herself. Court recessed for lunch, giving everyone a chance to breathe. Outside, the press had gathered in droves. Microphones poked at Carrie the moment she exited. Miss Underwood, how does it feel to stand up against a heavyweight developer? Asked a local news reporter. Carrie pressed her lips into a polite smile. It's about doing what's right, she replied. This isn't about money or headlines. It's about property I own, property that's been invaded. The afternoon session began with a flurry of arguments from Parker. He introduced experts on zoning to cast doubt on Carrie's position. One claimed the boundary lines were ambiguous. Another insisted that Carrie's land measurements were incomplete. She countered each claim calmly, referencing official records and pointing out glaring omissions in the defense's so-called evidence. Finally, near the end of the day, Parker gave a smug grin. Your Honor, I move to dismiss Miss Underwood's lawsuit on the basis of insufficient legal foundation. She has not proven ill intent, nor established that my client's development was maliciously placed on her land. A hush fell over the courtroom. Carrie stood, feeling a spark of defiance. Your Honor, I have more evidence, including a string of correspondences and repeated notices that Mr. Madsen's company chose to ignore. If that's not willful disregard for property rights, I'm not sure what is. Judge Bridger gazed down at Carrie, tapping his gavel gently on the desk. Everyone in the room held their breath. Motion denied, he said. We'll see this through. Parker's jaw tightened, though he managed to maintain a veneer of composure. Meanwhile, the relief that coursed through Carrie was palpable. She quietly thanked the judge, her focus unwavering. The day adjourned and tension was high. People filed out discussing how the pop country superstar had stood her ground against a veteran attorney. Some were impressed. Others remained unconvinced that she could truly win. The second day of trial dawned with even more press crowding the halls. Security escorted Carrie through the swirling chaos of cameras. She was used to adoring fans and paparazzi, but the stakes felt different here. No encores, no performance. Just a determination to secure her rights. Inside, Judge Bridger wasted no time. We'll proceed with further evidence. Miss Underwood, please bring your witness. Carrie took a deep breath. I'd like to call Mr. Daniel O'Malley. At the defense table, Gerald Parker went rigid. Madsen himself shot Parker a tense glance. Nobody had expected Daniel O'Malley. A tall, broad-shouldered man with a worn flannel jacket stepped forward, the kind of man who'd look more at home on a construction site than in a courtroom. He lowered his gaze as he raised his right hand to swear the oath. Mr. O'Malley, Carrie began, could you tell the court your affiliation with Madsen Development? He cleared his throat. I'm a construction foreman. I oversaw daily operations on the luxury condo project in question. Carrie's tone stayed respectful. And did you at any point become aware that this development was encroaching on land that belonged to me? O'Malley's eyes flickered with conflict. He darted a glance at Madsen. Yes, ma'am. The courtroom buzzed. Parker stood, face stony. Your Honor, I object. This witness was not on the original list. Carrie lifted her chin. He approached me late last night after hearing the testimony. He said he had information he couldn't keep to himself. Judge Bridger studied O'Malley. We'll allow it. Proceed. O'Malley squared his shoulders. We realized early in the project that the boundary line might be an issue. When I raised concerns, I was told to keep going and not to mention anything. I was assured it would be handled, but it never was. Who told you not to mention it? Carrie asked. O'Malley breathed heavily. Company supervisors. I'd rather not name names, but it was clear management knew this was on Miss Underwood's land. The gallery erupted in murmurs. Judge Bridger hammered his gavel for order. Parker attempted to reestablish his footing. Surely you're mistaken, Mr. O'Malley. Over the course of months, did you ever escalate your concerns to my client directly? O'Malley shifted uncomfortably. I did once, but he told me to keep it quiet or find another job. Madsen stiffened, turning a fierce look on his foreman. Carrie locked eyes with O'Malley. Is there anything else the court should know? He nodded grimly. There were two sets of construction plans, the official ones, and the modified ones that extended into your land. I brought the second set with me. Gasps filled the gallery as O'Malley held up a folder. Parker blanched while Madsen's face darkened with fury. Carrie took the folder and respectfully passed it to the bailiff. Your Honor, this is evidence that Mr. Madsen was not only aware of the encroachment, but actively facilitated it. Judge Bridger carefully examined the folder while Parker launched another protest. I strenuously object, Your Honor. These documents haven't been authenticated. Then you'll have your chance to review them, Bridger said, cutting him off. But the testimony stands. O'Malley's revelations ignited a media storm. By midday, the phrase Carrie Underwood's bombshell witness was trending on social networks. Outside, protesters for fair property laws began gathering, while fans chanted their support. In the afternoon, Parker tried to discredit O'Malley by suggesting the foreman had ulterior motives, but he couldn't shake the consistency of O'Malley's testimony. By the time the day ended, the once smug attorney looked ruffled. Carrie, though tired, remained poised. She didn't gloat, didn't smirk. She was simply relieved the truth was finally surfacing. The next day in court saw Parker scramble to salvage the defense. He called an urban planner named Whitney Miles, who tried to claim that the alleged second set of plans were mere draft sketches. But Carrie systematically pointed out the official stamps, the signatures, the date marks. Judge Bridger listened with a deepening frown, each piece fitting neatly into place. By now, Parker's condescension had all but vanished. He stopped mocking Carrie and started fighting for damage control. But with each new hour, the weight of evidence pressed on Madsen's case. Even Judge Bridger, who had originally eyed Carrie with doubt, seemed to respect the thoroughness of her legal approach. During a break, Gerald Madsen cornered Parker in a hallway. You said we had everything covered, he hissed, keeping his voice low. This is a PR nightmare, and she's actually winning. Parker straightened his tie, perspiration beading at his temple. I didn't expect your foreman to betray us. That was not in the plan. Madsen's eyes flashed. Then fix it. Carrie, passing by, caught a snippet of their heated exchange but said nothing. Instead, she returned to the courtroom to finalize her final round of evidence. More emails, more letters, each showing how Madsen development had been repeatedly warned. The tone in those communications was polite but firm. On the stand, the developer's admin assistant confirmed they'd received Carrie's messages and forwarded them up the chain. How did Mr. Madsen respond? Carrie asked the assistant. She fiddled with her hair, her voice trembling. He told me not to worry about it, that it would all go away eventually. When the defense rested, Parker paced by the defense table like a caged lion. Judge Bridger looked at both sides, exhaling loudly. We'll proceed with closing arguments in the morning. That night, the news channels lit up with panel discussions. Half believed Carrie Underwood was about to make legal history. The other half insisted it was a grandstanding performance by a celebrity. Carrie herself retreated to her Nashville home, reviewing her notes in a quiet corner of her living room. The next day, everything would be decided. Morning arrived, and the courtroom was more packed than ever. Judge Bridger gavelled for order. Let's begin closing arguments. Miss Underwood, you first. Carrie walked to the front, letting her gaze sweep over the jurors. I'm a songwriter, she began softly, used to telling stories. But this isn't fiction. This is about the land I worked hard to buy. It's about repeated warnings that were ignored, official records that were dismissed. It's about a powerful developer who bet on the idea that I'd never fight back. She paused, letting the tension build. But I did fight back, because no matter who you are, famous or not, nobody deserves to have what's theirs stolen. She gestured toward the evidence table. You've seen the emails, the surveys, the alternative set of plans that blatantly pushed beyond my property line. You heard Daniel O'Malley, who risked his livelihood to testify. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is willful encroachment. Carrie turned to the jury, her voice steady. You have the power to set this right, to prove that justice doesn't belong to those with the biggest legal team, but to those who stand for truth. She sat down, exhaling slowly. Parker got up. He cleared his throat, tugging at his lapels. Ladies and gentlemen, we can't let theatrics cloud the facts. Yes, Miss Underwood is talented, famous, and clearly dedicated, but property disputes are complicated. Boundaries can be misread, lines can shift. My client never intended to trespass. This is a case of good intentions and poor communication. He made a gesture of contrition. Let's not turn a boundary confusion into a crusade. We urge you to consider that Miss Underwood's evidence, while passionate, doesn't prove malicious intent beyond a reasonable doubt. In the silence that followed, Carrie studied the faces of the jury. They appeared thoughtful, some even sympathetic. Judge Bridger thanked both parties and instructed the jury to deliberate. A hush fell, and the jury vanished into the deliberation room. Minutes stretched into hours. Each passing moment felt like an eternity. Carrie sipped water, her nerves taut as guitar strings. Parker pretended to review notes, though it was clear from his restless foot-tapping that he was anxious too. Madsen's face had grown sour with each reveal of his company's wrongdoing. After lunch came and went, there was still no sign of the jury. Afternoon shadows lengthened across the polished floors. Carrie quietly tapped her foot, reflecting on how different this stage felt from any she'd stood on before. She had no microphone, no band, just facts and the hope that justice would prevail. Then, near late afternoon, a bailiff appeared, beckoning everyone back. The jury had reached a verdict. The tension was suffocating as the foreman returned, handing an envelope to Judge Bridger. The judge read it slowly, then cleared his throat. In the matter of Carrie Underwood versus Madsen Development and Mr. Gerald Madsen, the jury finds in favor of the plaintiff on all counts. The court awards compensatory damages for the encroachment, as well as punitive damages for willful disregard of property boundaries. A tidal wave of murmurs and gasps swept the courtroom. Carrie's hand flew to her mouth, relief and gratitude flooding her expression. A few fans in the gallery cheered until the judge's gavel hammered for silence. Judge Bridger regarded Carrie with a surprising gentleness. Miss Underwood, the court acknowledges your right to compensation and remediation. We'll discuss the exact remedies, but you've proven your case. She stood, bowing her head politely. Thank you, Your Honor. Madsen's face had turned a furious shade of red. Parker placed a hand on his shoulder, whispering urgent advice about appeals. But the tide had turned against them. The cameras inside the hall flashed wildly, capturing Carrie's calm but triumphant smile. When the court adjourned, reporters swarmed. "Carrie, how do you feel?" one shouted, pushing a microphone within inches of her face. She glanced at the throng, gathering her composure. "I feel relieved," she said. "I stood up for what's right, and the truth won." As Carrie left the courtroom, fans applauded, chanting her name. Others simply watched in awe that a country superstar had prevailed against a powerful developer without an army of lawyers. She paused on the courthouse steps, the late afternoon sun lighting her features. "I hope this shows that anyone, celebrity or not, can stand up for themselves," she said to the cameras. "Sometimes, you just have to be brave enough to do it." She slipped into a waiting car, refusing to celebrate until she returned to her property and felt the weight of her hard-earned victory. Later that evening, she stood on a small hill overlooking the piece of land that had caused all this uproar. It was quiet now, the offending construction halted by court order. Wind rustled the tall grass. She closed her eyes, remembering every step of the trial. A gentle breeze carried a sense of closure. Word spread quickly across social media. Carrie Underwood had not only represented herself, but she had also triumphed in a legal battle that many assumed she'd lose. Chat shows debated the significance. Was it a fluke? Proof that the system could still favor the little guy? Or was it just the star power effect? But for Carrie, the details hardly mattered anymore. She'd learned a lasting lesson. Sometimes you can't just sing about heartbreak or empowerment. You have to live it. She had walked into that courtroom with facts, a sense of duty, and a refusal to be intimidated by the condescending remarks of a judge or the cunning strategies of a defense attorney. She'd walked out with justice. The next day, the final hearing was a simple formality. Judge Bridger, while maintaining his stern facade, offered Carrie a nod of respect. He formally ordered Madsen Development to remove any encroaching structures and pay damages that would cover the legal expenses and restoration of the property. Parker attempted a brief protest, but Bridger dismissed it, stating, "The evidence is overwhelming. This court stands by the jury's decision." Afterward, as the gallery emptied, the judge paused to speak with Carrie quietly. "Miss Underwood, you had me fooled at first," he admitted. "I half expected a spectacle, but you made a legitimate, well-argued case." She smiled faintly. "Thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate the chance to be heard." He lowered his voice. "In all my years on the bench, I've never seen a celebrity handle a case on their own and come out on top. You might just have a second calling in the legal world." Carrie chuckled softly. "I think I'll stick to singing, but I'll remember this experience if I ever need to defend myself again." They parted ways with a handshake, leaving the courtroom behind. Outside, the flash of cameras was relentless. Carrie shielded her eyes, stepping into the sunlight. The legal fight was done, but she knew the public reaction would resonate for a while. People craved stories of underdogs winning, and it seemed her victory had struck a chord across the country. Reporters unleashed a barrage of questions. Will you sue for more damages? Will you press criminal charges? How does this compare to performing at the Grand Ole Opry? She answered them with careful tact, determined to keep the focus on property rights rather than turning her trial into a never-ending circus. From the corner of her eye, she spotted Daniel O'Malley lingering by the steps. He looked relieved, if a bit uncertain about what might happen next. The man had risked his job and reputation. Carrie approached him, brushing past eager correspondence. "Mr. O'Malley," she said gently, "thank you. Your honesty made all the difference." He shrugged in an awkward gesture, glancing at the cameras. "I figured it was time to do what was right. I'm just sorry it took me so long." She offered him a smile. "Well, if you ever need a job reference, I'm in your corner." His face brightened a shade. "I appreciate that, and I'm glad you got your land back." They parted with a firm handshake as Parker and Madsen stalked off in the opposite direction, stony-faced. Madsen's empire had taken a hit. There were whispers that he might face investigations for similar boundary infractions on other properties. He would likely fight it all with his bottomless pockets, but at least for now, justice had been served. Carrie closed her eyes as she slipped into the back seat of a black SUV, the hum of the engine a welcome reprieve from the media storm. In a few minutes, she'd be out of downtown, away from the swirl of cameras and commentary. She couldn't wait to kick off her shoes at home, maybe play a new melody on her guitar, one she'd been composing in her head each night during the trial. Though physically drained, she felt a sense of calm and purpose. The road ahead was sure to have more twists, but she'd confronted something daunting and emerged stronger. This wasn't about winning headlines. It was about standing up for what was hers, about telling those who tried to steamroll her, "Not today."